Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and of course today we're going to be talking a little bit about Elon Musk's COVID-19 tests. He has a couple positive, a couple negative, so we'll go into some details on that. We also have an interesting report on Tesla from Deutsche Bank after their conversation with Tesla's investor relations team, some news out of Indonesia, and Europe. Alright, so getting right into it, last night Elon Musk tweeted, quote, "Something extremely bogus is going on. Was tested for COVID 4 times today. 2 tests came back negative, 2 came back positive. Same machine, same test, same nurse, rapid antigen test from BD," end quote. So from here, there are a lot of follow-up tweets from Elon trying to get a little bit more information on the accuracy of these tests. That's a rabbit hole that I think is probably a little bit outside the scope of this podcast, and I also don't necessarily want to go down it, but Elon is basically questioning the efficacy, the potential rate of false positives that could be being reported, both for Elon in this case, or for the general population. Need to make it clear that we don't know if these are false positives or false negatives. But Elon on Twitter says, quote, "If it's happening to me, it's happening to others. I'm getting PCR tests from separate labs. Results will take about 24 hours, end quote. So if you do feel so inclined to do more research on this before Elon gets those PCR test results back, I will put a link in the show notes or in the description to the FDA's documents on this BD test. There they have a reference table that compares the results of 226 tests for the BD antigen test versus a PCR test, which takes longer to get back but is reported to be more accurate. And to me, at least from this table, it looks like false negatives would be more common than false positives. Of the 226 samples, 31 tested positive in the PCR results, while only 26 of those 31 tested positive on the BD antigen test, with the remaining 5 testing negative. None of the 26 positive results from the BD antigen test tested negative on the PCR test in this group. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean a false negative can't happen, but at least from this information, it looks to be less likely. But of course, in an individual isolated circumstance like this, there are other factors to consider. The test could have been administered incorrectly, there could be errors with the machine, the list goes on. So I think we might as well just wait and see what the results from Elon's PCR test are. That should come in later tonight, so overnight, Friday night in the United States. As for symptoms, Elon says right now he has symptoms of a typical cold, quote, "Nothing unusual so far." And then in another tweet, he gives a little more detail saying, quote, "Mild sniffles and cough and slight fever past few days. Right now, no symptoms, although I did take NyQuil," end quote. So we'll wait for more information on this, but something that may be impacted by this is SpaceX's Crew-1 launch, which is scheduled for tomorrow night at about 7:50 p.m. Eastern Time. So that'll be a SpaceX mission sending 4 astronauts to the International Space Station. So SpaceX has yet to comment on any impact here, but Jim Bridenstine, the administrator of NASA, did say today, quote, "When somebody tests positive for COVID, here at the Kennedy Space Center and across NASA, it is our policy for that person to quarantine and self-isolate, so we anticipate that will be taking place." Continuing on to say, quote, "Of course, if there are changes that need to be made, we will look at those, but it's very early right now to know if any changes are necessary at this point." And then also adding, quote, "There's a lot to learn. Our astronauts have been in quarantine for weeks, and they should not have had any contact with anybody. They should be in good shape," end quote. So hopefully no impact to the Crew-1 launch tomorrow, but that remains to be seen as well. Oh, and sorry, literally right as I'm recording this, we got an update from Jim Bridenstine on Twitter. He says, quote, "Update due to onshore winds and recovery operations, NASA and SpaceX are targeting launch of the Crew-1 mission with astronauts to the space station at 7:27 p.m. Eastern Time, Sunday, November 15th. The first stage booster is planned to be reused to fly astronauts on Crew-2," end quote. So it looks like that has been delayed a day already just due to weather, but at least at this point in time does still seem to be a go. All right, next up here we have an interesting note from Deutsche Bank. This was shared by Remster32 over on the Tesla Motors Club forums. They write that they have recently hosted Martin Viecha, Tesla's head of investor relations, at their 2020 Deutsche Bank Auto Tech conference, and they're summarizing their key takeaways here in this note. So a lot of this is stuff that we have been talking about, but some of this is new information. They write, quote, "Tesla sees large cost levers beyond just the battery moving forward and is seeing very robust demand for its often underappreciated energy storage products. Moreover, it continues to target a full self-driving subscription offering next year," end quote. They then have 5 bullet points here, starting with, quote, "While battery costs have been capturing the bulk of headlines, Tesla believes it will garner large savings from its new plants, Shanghai, Berlin, and Austin, driven by operational efficiencies, facility layout, much lower depreciation and amortization, supply chain proximity, i.e. no suppliers in California, and lower labor costs," end quote. So I've been beating this drum for a long time. Operational leverage and operational efficiency continues to, in my opinion, be underestimated and understated at Tesla. We saw a bit of this start to come through last quarter. Tesla posted a 9.2% operating margin versus last year's 4.1%. And that is with Tesla largely operating below production capacity. So for Q4, as we talked about on Tuesday's episode, should improve pretty significantly yet again. So about that operating leverage, Deutsche Bank says, quote, "In relation, management is targeting low teens operating margin in the midterm and sees this as a better metric relative to gross margin given it is not overly influenced by vehicle pricing dynamics and illustrates the strong OPEX leverage Tesla is generating," end quote. So to low teens from again where Tesla was at in Q3 of 9%, at minimum that would be up to 13%, so a 4 percentage point increase. And Tesla's quarters going forward should pretty easily be $10 billion plus in revenue. So instead of doing $800 million in operating income like Tesla did in Q3, you can pretty easily add $500 million to that every quarter, and it really shouldn't be all that long before we see a doubling of that. So if we go back to Q3 in 2019, Tesla's operating income was $261 million. They increased that to Q3 2020 to $800 million. If we fast forward to Q3 next year, you're looking at probably pretty easily in excess of $1.6 billion, which is why I think price to earnings ratios don't really mean much to companies that are growing this quickly and are starting from a low earnings base, because in just 2 years there, you're going from $260 million to more than $1.6 billion in operating income, most likely. So a 7 or 8-fold increase in 24 months. And the point that's being made here is that because Tesla is growing their scale, they can continue to generate more operating leverage. So even if their gross margin stays flat or even declines, they can actually continue to improve their operating margin, which at the end of the day, that's what's important. The next bullet here is on full self-driving. They say, quote, "Full self-driving beta testing continues and Tesla is making improvements with each release. Longer term, as the price of FSD increases, the company is planning to launch some type of subscription option next year. Although it would not provide details, it could envision the subscription service layering in several tiers of pricing to account for different use cases, such as highway pilot only or full robotaxi mode," end quote. So not much more to add to that. I think Tesla's in a really good position where they've delivered and will continue to deliver a lot of value, and they have a lot of options to capitalize on that value. Probably the least surprising bullet is next. Tesla remains confident in their vision-based autonomous system. They do not believe they will need to incorporate LiDAR. No surprise there. Deutsche Bank says, quote, "The team is primarily focused on city driving in North America and will expand more aggressively into other regions afterwards," end quote. The last bullet here, and probably the most interesting one, reads, quote, "Tesla is also seeing very robust demand for its energy storage offerings, indicating that the Megapack is the highest demand product launched in the company's history, with the order book extending out to 2023. This is being driven by low battery costs, which is making ownership for government utilities more affordable than comparable gasoline/diesel alternatives. Tesla expects to ship 3.3 gigawatt hours this year versus 1.65 gigawatt hours last year, and expects that to double in 2021. Supply has been constrained by cell capacity thus far, but Tesla sees this bottleneck improving as suppliers ramp up output. E.g., LG is planning to increase production of 2170 cells," end quote. Okay, so a few things here. I think the LG comment at the end might throw people off, wondering if they meant Panasonic, but LG has been approved for a while now to work with Tesla even on vehicles. I think they're supplying some cells for the China Model 3, and they've definitely worked with Tesla on energy products in the past. Then the next interesting point here is Tesla expecting to ship 3.3 gigawatt hours this year. That would be a doubling over last year. I think Deutsche Bank is probably just taking some old guidance here. I think at the beginning of the year, that was Tesla's aspiration before all the shutdowns had happened. So I don't know, but I don't think this would be an updated number from their meeting with Martin. So far through the first 3 quarters of this year, they've delivered about 1.4 gigawatt hours. So they would need to more than double their entire year-to-date deliveries in the 4th quarter to achieve that 3.3 gigawatt hour number. They'd have to jump from 700 megawatt hours or 0.7 gigawatt hours installed in Q3 all the way up to 1900 megawatt hours or 1.9 gigawatt hours installed in Q4. That would be incredible, but I'm not personally going to forecast for that just based on this information. The last piece of this is the Megapack being the highest demand product launched in the company's history. That's pretty impressive considering we've heard the same about Tesla's Cybertruck, which they have said has more than 600,000 pre-orders. I think people are still pretty skeptical of Tesla Energy as a business line, but we have continued to see it grow steadily, even though a bit behind expectations. And time and again, we have seen evidence of really a supply constraint there, but robust demand. So that wraps up the Deutsche Bank note. Let's move on to Indonesia. We've talked over the last few weeks about how there have been rumors that Tesla may be working with Indonesia to set up some sort of operations in the country. As we have talked about in the past, Indonesia is the largest producer of nickel. So Reuters today has reported that, quote, Indonesian President Joko Widodo said that he will send a high-level team next week to meet with top executives of US automaker Tesla as the Southeast Asian country aims to become the world's biggest producer of electric vehicle batteries, end quote. Indonesia has recently simplified some of their laws under a new omnibus job creation law. So about that and about this trip to the US, which will include the meeting with Tesla, Indonesian president said, quote, it's very important because we have a great plan to make Indonesia the biggest producer of lithium batteries and we have the biggest nickel reserves, end quote. So nice to have a little bit more concrete information about the situation with Tesla and Indonesia. I think we'll eventually end up seeing something develop here, but I think it remains to be seen whether that would just be something like a nickel mining operation or full battery pack assembly. Maybe this ends up being a Tesla energy hub. I doubt they'll do vehicle production there, but who knows? All right, lastly today, I just wanted to follow up on a couple of points from yesterday's episode. First, we'll start off with the BMW iX. Many of you correctly pointed out that the iX is more comparable in size to the Model X versus the Model Y. And that is right, that's my mistake. I don't know why, I just assumed it would be in the Model Y category. To me, it looked like a smaller vehicle, kind of like the Model Y. But BMW said it is comparable in length and width to the X5, which is 194 inches by 79 inches, versus the Model X at 198 inches by 79 inches as well. And then BMW said the height is more like an X6, which is 66 inches, the same as the Model X. So the iX will be a bit smaller than the Model X, but closer to the Model X than the Model Y. So that makes the efficiency comparison a little bit more confusing because if we look at the Model X, the WLTP rating for the Model X is only 561 kilometers, and BMW says they should exceed 600 kilometers with the iX. Using the WLTP numbers though, the Model X would still be quite a bit more efficient than the iX, with a 100 kilowatt hour pack going 561 kilometers. That's a little bit under 18 kilowatt hours used per 100 kilometers, versus BMW is saying they should be under 21 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. So that would have the iX taking about 17% more energy per kilometer. But that's on the WLTP cycle, which has been generous to electric vehicles in general, with Tesla seeming to be an exception to that. Probably my guess here is because Tesla does optimize a little bit more for that highway range at the expense of their WLTP rating. But I don't exactly know enough about the tests to say that with certainty. But if we look at the EPA range, the combined rating for the Model X is 371 miles, and that's actually 597 kilometers. So they're actually scoring better on the EPA rating than on the WLTP rating, which we almost never see. We then come back to the iX, and they said they should have an EPA city test cycle greater than 300 miles, which, as we talked about yesterday, strictly from that number, not considering the WLTP ratings, I believe is likely to result in a combined EPA rating below 300 miles. So even using the Model X as a comparison instead of the Model Y, we're still looking at the Model X maybe having 30% more range on the EPA test cycle than the BMW iX. And that would be the case even though the BMW iX looks like it'll have a pack that's 20 to 25% more energy capacity than the Model X. So yes, I do agree the Model X is likely a better comparison here, but even substituting that in for the Model Y in yesterday's analysis, we still see this huge discrepancy in the efficiency of the BMW iX versus Tesla's vehicles. So that's the iX, and then the other thing I want to follow up on is that Universum study. I was wondering aloud how Tesla could be number one in engineering in the United States and not even in the top 50 worldwide. A lot of people have commented being like, well, obviously Tesla doesn't have operations worldwide, and then saying that this study probably didn't look at China. So I did just want to follow up on that. That study did survey students from Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, Russia, South Korea, the UK, and the US. So yes, while Tesla may not have a presence built out in all of those countries yet, they do in China, they do in the US, they're going to very soon here in Germany. They would be hiring already for a lot of those jobs. I would think a lot of students in Germany are aware of that and would have interest. So I still think the discrepancy here is pretty surprising, and I'm still pretty curious on the methodology. I mean, maybe I could see that being the case if you're doing sort of an equal weighting from all 12 of those countries, but if there's any sort of weighting involved for market size, then I'm still confused. So hopefully we'll hear back from them, but I did see a lot of comments on the video yesterday for both of those topics, so I wanted to make sure to follow up on them today. But that'll wrap it up for this episode and for the week. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribed and signed up for notifications. You can also follow me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast. and I'll see you next week for the Monday, November 16th episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.